activities that have been going on in and around Guyana. I unfortunately did not have the time. What I did a couple of weeks ago is I had some guest hosts, which unfortunately I wasn't able to do these last few weeks, again with the holidays and the unfortunate disruption to our scheduling. So, nonetheless, we are back here as usual, and you know we've had so much going on in and around Guyana. But first, before we begin our chatting, our in-depth analysis, if you will, on what is happening in and around Guyana, I have to introduce my one of my more regular, but definitely one of my more respected guests in terms of his legal opinion, his character, what he's done for Guyana. So let me introduce Mr. Timothy Jonas, everyone. Thank you again for being here with us.
Thank you for having me, Kian. Good to be here again.
You know you'll be here as much as we possibly can have you, because like the public, I myself am always interested in your opinion and your current your take on current affairs here in Guyana.
Well, I gotta say, Kian, I think that your show is becoming more important, and especially given that you are in the minority, in that it seems that the Press Association has identified for Guyana that every single member of our press either leans one way or the other way, and there's nobody neutral, non-aligned. So I think you are becoming more important. What you're doing is more important as we go along. So I hope you keep it up.
I appreciate that. It's funny you mentioned the Press Association at the to begin with, because I guess we can start off having a very brief chat about press, about the media circumstance here in Guyana. But just before I start on that, I just like everyone to know I do have our WhatsApp number up on the screen there, 689-8474. You're more than welcome to call. I will try to take the calls as they come in. You can reach us on that number locally or on WhatsApp. Feel free to call or message. Nonetheless, let's begin. You know, you started off by mentioning the Press Association. Just to update everyone on the current situation, the Guyana Press Association has been somewhat in turmoil over the last few weeks. I think large in part because they have an upcoming election, which is supposed to take place on Sunday coming. So there has been a lot of back and forth in the media between the various media houses, with different organizations claiming that there's a bias, that there's something a little bit more underhanded going on with the upcoming election. I'm going to tell you very much, I have not had the chance personally to sit down and read the rules or regulations or constitution, if you will, of the Guyana Press Association. But nonetheless, there are allegations out there that there's a certain sect of the media that do not feel like the process is legitimate or transparent or is lacking accountability. So we've been watching obviously keenly with what's going on. What I would like to say is within the last couple of weeks, I think maybe 2 weeks ago, was International Press Freedom Day or something along those lines, in which there's the international press body, the International Association, that puts out their index, much like transparency or corruption indices are put out around the country, around the world. And the Press Freedom Index came out, in which they rank various countries around the world and how free and fair their press is in that country. And what we found very interesting is Guyana actually fell 20 points on that index within the last year, because I think it's an annual index. So it was quite the plummet from where we were currently standing, to the point where we saw not only messages from our international partners, meaning various countries around the world, but what we saw, and we'd only ever seen this again during, I think, the election time, the 2020 election time, where the ABC countries came together, ABCE countries came together and actually did a joint press statement on the matter, in which they highlighted some issues, in their diplomatic way, made reference to quite a few areas of concern that they had found when it came to press freedom here in Guyana and information being unbiased and the various media houses being given the same privilege no matter what side of the fence they stand on or whether they're unbiased or not. And we found that very interesting, again, with the backing that we did fall 20 places. So what, give me, let me ask a very simple question to start. What is your opinion on the media situation in Guyana to begin with?
Well, that's a broad question. I'll tell you, it was something that I have not given much thought to before, let's say 2019, when I first looked seriously at the relations between the political parties and the interactions among the individuals in parliament, in cabinet, in government, in the ministries, and their interactions with members of the press. And the first thing that struck me, and it struck me forcibly, especially during the recount, for example, is how important the press is to allow members of the public to have access to the truth. And here's the thing about the truth. The truth might be convenient or inconvenient. You might like it or you might hate it. It might be against you or it might be for you. But it stands alone. It's the truth. It's immovable. And what I noticed is that insofar as individual members of the press found themselves aligned with one side or with the other side, they became less interested in the truth and more interested in defending a position. Now, this is Guyana, and as soon as you talk politics, 90% go one side or the other side. So that is almost inevitable. But the reason that is so dangerous in the press is that the media is potentially the most powerful voice in our society. And also, because it is potentially the most powerful voice in our society, it is the members of the media are the first in line to be oppressed or intimidated if the people in power feel threatened. So you had a situation, and I saw this, where you had members of the media outside the conference center waiting for folk who were in the conference center to come out to give them updates. And I would be asked questions by members of the Chronicle, for example, government-owned paper. And it was so obvious that the questions that were asked were not to solicit real information of what was going on inside, but to solicit confirmation of their own view of what they wanted to present to their listeners. Similarly now, and our challenge, Chronicle, and I'm going to use Chronicle as the example, to tell the public how many of the reporters who were happily employed by them in 2016, 2017, 2018 remain employed by them now. Mm-hmm. Because those same folk who loyally were asking questions, hoping to solicit information from which they could present something to their supporters, their listeners, have all now gone because the leadership has changed, Chronicle has new ownership, they're out, and a whole new, fresh set of people are in, equally biased, equally problematic, and equally determined not to worry too much about the truth, which stands alone, but to extract some kind of information so that their slant can be sold with some kind of plausibility. As long as we do that, you can't take the media seriously. What I also found, and I want to say this too because it cuts two ways, is that the members of the press recognized their own liability, their own vulnerability to potential attack because they are so powerful. And they were very good at protecting each other, even across the political divide. And that was important. And to me, that is the first line of defense that I am happy to see in the members of the press. They might like their colleague, they might agree with their colleague's politics, but they're not going to allow an outsider to do something to exploit or threaten or make them vulnerable. And that's their first line of defense, and I'm proud of them for that. However, the infighting that occurs because of the lack of professionalism in not trying to get to the truth undermines the very power that they recognize that they have. And where can you get the truth? You got a member of the public sitting out. He turns on TV, he opens the newspaper, he turns on social media, and he goes to some media site. And because there is so much information available, you have the luxury of choosing what media site you want to go to. And therefore, you choose the media site that presents a slant of information that accords with your own political point of view. And that is, to me, the most alarming part of the media in Guyana. Let me tell you, if you are a PPP loyalist, you don't watch Gordon Mosley. Mm-hmm. And if you are an APNU loyalist, you don't look at Newsroom. And the news that those two give are so different and so slanted that each side of the divide, the populace on each side, receive a totally different version of so-called facts, mm-hmm. and therefore are reinforced and feel vindicated and justified in their view, watching the news media house that accords with their point of view. And therefore they think they are vindicated in their criticism of the other side and their justification of their own side. And somewhere there needs to be an honest media house with integrity and that can broach that divide and can present the views fairly. I think Stabrook News does well. I think on a good day, Kaieteur News tries to do well, although Kaieteur News seems to have. The problem with the social media houses is that you don't have informed and investigative reporting. You just got a snapshot and a soundbite, and that's not real information. But it can easily be slanted, and it can easily lead you astray. Mm-hmm. Our media got to be careful, and I think we are seeing the problems they're facing now in the current imbroglio that they are in.
Well, it's funny you mention the various media houses that show their bias one side or the next, because what I find very interesting is the media houses that are raising an alarm with the current situation, with the current election, the Press Association election, are media houses that people, I think, have grown to realize are slanted. And, I think it's important, we have to be very frank with these situations, especially with the position that we're in, is understanding that the media houses that are raising this alarm are very PPP aligned. All right. I challenge anybody to go on to, let's say Newsroom, which is one of the media houses that is raising the alarm, and find if you've seen anything within the last 3 years negative about what the PPP government has done. And I mean, let's be honest, there's definitely no angels in this political situation. So what's worrying though is very recently, again, just as another bit of information, and I remember this in particular because I was watching this press conference. I don't watch all press conferences, but I happened to catch this one going live, which was done by President Ali over the river at Lenora, and there was a young Kaieteur journalist there, Kaieteur News journalist, which. Again, the floor was open to questions, and her being a representative of a media of an established and again credible media house, licensed media house, if you will, stood up to ask a few questions with regards to the oil industry, and she was met with, although the words themselves may not have been aggressive in nature, the tone was in the president's response, to the point where it got the crowd involved, and you realize that she started to be, heckled and attacked by members of the public, by just the general audience, because you realize with the scoffing and the, I don't have time for this kind of questions now kind of responses. Or, you're asking me something that I don't even need to answer. Kind of, an arrogant type posture got that same reaction from people. But just to understand how far it went, is the Press Association the next day came out with a release not scorning, not attacking, but again reprimanding, if you will, in a lighter term, the president for that type of situation that occurred when that media operative was doing their job. And what I have found is, since that time, if you listen to the press conferences, and what we often get, unfortunately, I encourage everyone to do it, is very often we get these little sound bites, like you said, from these media houses. And depending on what side they're on, will depend on the sound bite that you'll get. And what I find very interesting personally is, if you listen to the whole press conference yourself and really take your time to assess the answers, you will come up with very interesting, ideas, because as you read someone's body language, as you listen to their tone and their words,
you get a completely different point of view.
There you go.
Exactly, from what has been sold to you.
Yes.
And I think another thing that happens is that if you have one presenter, all right, you get his point of view. But for some reason, we don't believe in a forum like this where you will have two presenters who have differing points of view. Mm-hmm. So you have seen, you remember the Lampy and Pampy show?
Yes.
You have two people who got the same point of view, share the same ideology, got the same biases, and therefore it's like they talk into the mirror. You can't have a conversation that is informative and informed unless the person you're speaking to got a different point of view, an independent point of view, so that there can be a debate. Yeah. That is what an informed conversation is about. That is what Hard Talk is on BBC. That is what 60 Minutes was on CBS. Mm-hmm. That is where you can sit down and assess and informatively form your own conclusion. Right. But what I find is that the media houses here are quite happy to pretend that that's going on, but it's two identical twins having a conversation at each other, saying exactly the same thing.
Right.
And that doesn't help the situation either. So a lot needs to be done. Mm-hmm. And hopefully this will shed some light on it. Yeah. I remember another incident. I mean, you were talking about that attack on a specific media personality, but there have also been incidents where both governments in turn have held news briefs, have invited media, but excluded some media houses, so that they're only speaking to their own. Mm-hmm. Again, that is something that I think a professional media organization would decline an invitation to go to that kind of interview if they knew that another media house that doesn't share their point of view but is a legitimate media house has been excluded. That's what professionalism is about. Yeah. Hopefully we will see more of it.
Well, again, we're going to get to the point now where this election, I think, it's gone to the courts now. So we're not sure whether the election is going to happen immediately. But nonetheless, I think it's something, another area that the joint statement with the ABCE countries raised is understanding what free press and media is as a democratic principle in a nation, is understanding that without press freedom, without having the media portray biased and putting them in positions that they will only speak about what the government or that person wants to speak about in a positive light, it ends up challenging whether a country is free and fair.
Well, I'll tell you this, Kian. I don't think we do that badly in Guyana in that respect, because at the end of the day, what we have been talking about here is criticisms of the media personnel personally, people who we believe are showing a bias. Mm-hmm. You have an absolute right to show a bias. Yeah. And I would defend your right to go and show your bias and to have your media house, as Fox News does in the States, that is biased. And in Guyana, I have not seen that there has been any media houses shut down. The worst we've seen is, for example, when advertising was taken away from some newspapers and that kind of thing, which was pretty bad. That was pretty extreme. We haven't seen much of that recently. But the other end of that spectrum is favoritism and subsidization. And I think that is where we are falling down. You see, a good media house that has the trust of the people and is doing its work properly and is conducting investigative journalism and is reporting fairly is going to earn its own dollar. People are going to want to watch it, and therefore it's going to get its advertising revenue. People will advertise, people will be loyal. A RAG is going to lose customers and therefore is going to lose revenue. And we have a situation where we have government-owned rags that have no fear of losing revenue because they can preach the government spiel as Chronicle has done for the last 30 years.
Yeah.
And nobody seriously reads it. But every single ministry buys Chronicle newspaper. Every single government department, every single government agency buys Chronicle newspapers. The governments place all their ads in Chronicle newspaper, so they get subsidized. Same thing with the radio station. Same thing with the television.
Yeah.
Now, for me, I believe the state should not own any media house.
Good. I'm going to ask you that. Tell me, give me, you've already started, but it's a very interesting situation here where in Guyana you have NCN, you have Chronicle, you have DPI that are all government funded institutions. All right. And what we find very interesting is not only are those media houses not profitable, but hundreds of millions of taxpayers' dollars go into them every year in order to bail them out, in order to subsidize them. And what we found, and again, you're more than welcome to challenge it again, much like you just challenged Chronicle. We know that every time the government changes, house is cleaned and their own people are put in there. Every single time without fail. So now my question to you is, having this kind of scenario in which you clearly have a biased media that is being funded by taxpayers, what do you propose the solution to that type of situation is?
If you gave me a swing vote in Parliament, I rather suspect that the opposition in Parliament would agree to legislation that says the government may not own or control any media house, and to provide a timeline and a process to sell the existing media houses, so NCN, Chronicle, and what's the other one? There's one more.
DPI.
Yes. To liquidate them, to get a value, sell the shares, sell it to the public, sell it to any investor, and along with the employees as a going concern. And then after that, survival of the fittest, Darwin's law, they sink or they swim on merit as a media house competing equally with the other independent media houses that are out there right now surviving on their wits.
Right.
But as long as you have them with that luxury that no matter how poor the quality is, no matter how biased, no matter how skeptical the reader is of what they're reading in there, that they know they're getting government ads, they know they're getting subsidized, that's a problem. So it's one thing at one end of the spectrum to complement the powers that be, to say, look, they're not locking up journalists, they're not silencing them, nobody getting, killed or kidnapped in places like Mexico and that kind of thing, great. But at the other end of the spectrum, you also must not be subsidizing and giving assistance to the people who are talking where you want them to talk. And that's where I think we are falling down. And for me, there needs to be no government ownership and no government subsidization of any media house. And steps need to be taken to liquidate, sell it, and let them either sink or swim on their own on the open market.
Good. I personally had done a small calculation about a year ago. I don't think 2023 budget, 2022 budget, where I had added together all the money that was given to DPI, all the taxpayers' dollars that was allocated and budgeted to DPI, Chronicle, and NCN. And it was almost equivalent to the amount of money that was given to GUYANA. So
I wouldn't be surprised.
So I had come up with this theory that we could just do away with all the media and then in turn take that money and give Guyanese free water.
But I think more than that, I think it's also used as an avenue to quietly employ folk as trolls on social media.
Okay.
And that is equally dangerous and equally sinister.
Yeah. But we're talking about a very new issue here, as of only very recently here in Guyana, within the last, let's say, less than 10 years. Let's say five years.
Last 5-6 years.
Yeah. In which we even up to the show is on Facebook. And I mean, you can go through the comments very often and you can see the same people in their same fake accounts commenting and commenting and commenting all their opinions, if you will. And although all of the opinions are extremely aligned, are extremely similar, you begin to get the understanding. And I think this is something everyone out there needs to understand is there are people out here now in Guyana, and not only in Guyana, but around the world, that you can employ as a company, or as a government, that will create these fake accounts, create these bots, if you will. And what they do is they go onto social media and they make it appear as though the masses believe this. So, if they're then allocated to say, okay, if Timothy Jonas or if David Granger or if President Ali makes a post or a comment, I want you to go onto their account and write all of these negative things to attack whatever they've said. It doesn't need to have any kind of basis. It doesn't need to have any kind of truth to your matter. As a matter of fact, the more you lie, the better, right? And the truth is, I think a lot of people need to become more weary of these types of situations when it comes to our social dynamics. Here in Guyana, I can tell you, we know for a fact that there are quite a few people locally that are employed to go onto social media and just any kind of distraction. And that's another side of it as well, just so you know, not just attack the people that are the naysayers, if you will, not only to attack the people on the other side, but also to create distractions. Basically, anytime something big is happening in Guyana, what you'll find is there's going to be a whole group of people causing another set of drama on with something else, some minuscule, insignificant issue, in order to pull the attention away. And it's very interesting because that's the kind of the power that social media has. And I think a lot of people need to start, taking some time, and when you're reading and assessing, whether it be on social media, mainly social media, but really take the time to think about where these comments or these types of situations are arising, right? And why they're arising. And it's a sensitization process. Bear in mind, Guyana, luckily for us, and I always say luckily, but in this case, it is to our benefit. Guyana is a very young nation, and everything that happens all around the world takes its time to trickle down here. So these social media situations have been used for many, many years in North America and first world countries to have create their own, havoc.
On the flip side, though, because we're so small in terms of the size of the population, it doesn't take a large number of people to have a much greater effect. So that it's much easier to infiltrate using the system you're talking about, just with a couple dozen people.
Yeah.
And suddenly you have a landslide of comments that are negative, that are hollow and empty, but that distract from the real issue.
Yeah.
And then suddenly you have new news, some car accident or some nonsense that distracts attention from real issues again. And, I guess it's a personal thing, but I ask myself, what satisfaction do these people get out of doing something like this?
Money.
What personal? Well, if
It's
money is
just
personal satisfaction.
Tim, when you're I'll give you my opinion. When you're in a country like Guyana, that everyone is fighting for scraps and has no possibility of getting a job and becoming an independent person and creating and building wealth and becoming successful, unless the government allows them, then they have no other choice but to eat from the hand that feeding them.
Well, I think this goes back to what you said about luckily, because unluckily, because our government is the largest employer and the largest contracting party and the largest contractor, and because they're so flush with money right now from oil that we haven't, free money that Exxon has given them, I see a lot of people are being silenced. And they're afraid to speak out. They're afraid to say anything. They might lose this contract, but they're told, shut up, don't say anything, because we might give you the next contract.
Right.
And there's no dignity in it. This staying quiet, hoping for a crumb next time, knowing that the crumbs this time fell to some crony, some family and friend. It's something that is becoming more oppressive, and I think it's growing. And at some point, I hope that as citizens, people with self-respect, people with pride, you got to stand up and take a stand and draw a line.
I'll even go the other side for you, Tim. I think that those same people at this point in time are doing what they need to do to survive. And I think themselves, any legitimate businessman, any man that has a head on his shoulders and is not just, trying to pull from all directions because he really has no substance himself, but any self-respecting businessman that knows his trade and understands what he's doing will also realize that the little scraps that they're getting, these 1 or 2 contracts, is not a road to the promised land. The money that they're getting, even to where they were, and they've learned this with organizations, and again, I'll call names, with organizations like BK and so on, they've realized that, wait a second, they're not even going to let anybody get to that stature anymore. And because they don't want anybody to gain that type of independence. So even these contracts that they're getting, and they're making the little freck to survive today, they're not building any kind of luxury or independence come 10 years from now. Especially more so if they have to keep eating from that hand, or they have to keep, I would use some harsher profanity.
Without the luxury of self-sufficiency. So never having enough to be self-sufficient.
Never having enough. Never, ever having enough.
And that might be the problem with some of the same individuals in the press. Because if they're employed and they don't toe the line, they know they risk their jobs, and they know it might not be easy to get another job. So you have to write your report, you have to write your articles, you have to sell your story according to the line that's dictated to you.
Yeah.
And that's tough.
We need Guyanese to have a little bit more self-respect. That's what we need.
Well, it's easy. It's easy to be judgmental, but people got to live. And if you don't have the wherewithal, if you don't have a layer of fat, a bit of money in the bank, something to keep you going, you got children to look after, mortgage to pay, rent to pay. It's very hard to make a decision that might jeopardize the rickety financial structure that you're barely getting by on. And I think that may be one of the prominent and ongoing problems that needs a resolution in Ghana. There needs to be a better situation.
I know you're a very solution-based person, Tim. As a businessman myself here in Guyana, continuing down, I will always say the definition of insanity, as everyone knows, is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. So if you're continuing every cycle, every opportunity that you're there begging the government, trying to do what you need to do to get the contract, buying them drinks when you go out, creating these lavish functions so that you can show off to win a contract here and there. The truth is, buying them gifts, which is very common. The truth of the matter is, when are you going to realize that again is not the road to the promised land? How long have you been doing that now? At what point are you going to realize, wait a second, I'm doing this for how long have ever I've been doing it, and I still can't stop doing it? So at what point do you get to the point where, again, and I always like to use the reference, these public servants that work for you, these ministers that work for you, that you voted in power, you are now running behind them, begging them for help, as though they're your employers.
Yeah.
And at what point in time are you going to open your eyes a little bit and say, hold on a second, something wrong here? Funny enough, it happened in 2015 to an extent. Granted, APNU did not go in and do any better. Don't get me wrong, this is not a promotion of what that political party did when they were in power. But nonetheless, I think a lot of that time, a lot of people need to go back and remember, wait a second, we don't need to keep doing this, because that is what got the swing votes that came 2015, that everybody said, I don't need to keep kissing ass.
It's funny, that you mentioned that time, because there was a small renaissance, a period of time when we all had hope. And there was actually a time when independent-minded and competent people were being put into positions of importance. And I'll come back to Chronicle. A new board was appointed at Chronicle, and that board had some independent-minded folk who had good intentions. I think the first one resigned after 3 months. And the other one lasted 2 months. And then you saw party hacks going in. And I think that says a lot. That the people who have the competence, have the independence, have the vision, are not the people that are wanted in those positions. The people who are wanted in those positions are party hacks who will total in.
Yes, man.
Yeah.
You go in there and you.
No.
All right. Okay. Well, you know what? We're halfway through the show. We're going to talk about, I think, the most burning, pressing issue here in Guyana. Once again, not an issue that you will see on unfortunate PVP websites and news agencies. Not too much information in Chronicle, not too much information in NCN or DPI, not too much information on Newsroom. But nonetheless, one of the very interesting scenarios that have recently taken place in which there was a high court ruling that and correct me if I'm wrong because I know you're more familiar with it. It was a high court ruling by a judge here in Guyana, where you had a group of citizens that took Exxon and what are they called? Sorry, EPA to court in order to state that they were not following the laws of the country in which more coverage and insurance for oil spills was needed. And this is very layman. I know you're going to get into detail. Nonetheless, the judge ruled in favor of that group of people and said that Exxon needs to provide more coverage. And I'm going to use a word that again, they're using as a very large distraction here in Guyana, unlimited coverage. And they keep saying, but that's not a real thing. That doesn't exist. But nonetheless, the ruling was basically stating that Exxon needs to cover 100% of any crisis or tragedy that occurs within that oil industry and what's happening. And the judge also made mention that EPA themselves were not acting within the law by not enforcing those clauses. So please elaborate for us and tell us your opinion on this.
Yeah, that was a serious case. And first of all, congratulations to the lawyers who argued it, and to Justice Kisun for his decisiveness. Now, we sit down here and one thing Facebook has taught me is every Guyanese is an expert on every single subject under the sun. Yeah? So I've seen so many comments on this on one side and the other. I try to look at media houses from both sides. Let's start at the beginning. I would invite the viewer to go on Google Exxon Valdez oil spill. We don't have a sense, I think, of how huge, how enormous, how catastrophic an oil spill can be. We are accustomed to our brown water out there, but in that brown water, you got fish, you got wildlife, you got aquatic animals, and it's clean but muddy. If you have an oil spill so that you have thousands of gallons of crude oil washing up on that seawall, what do we do? Do we send our Coast Guard out with the couple of rowboats that they have? Do we send our GDF out with the couple machines that they have? What capacity do we have in Guyana to treat with a serious oil spill? And you can't discount the fact that an oil spill is possible, because oil spills happen. Now, Exxon takes safety measures, I'm sure. I don't know very much about their internal operations, but given the potential liability, I'm sure they try to be very careful. But I also know that there have been oil spills. So, do we sit down with our fingers crossed and hope that there won't be an oil spill? Or do we take the measures that are necessary to ensure that if there's an oil spill, we're not relying on our Coast Guard with the two boats to go out there with a mop and mop up 6,000 gallons of oil? We got to look at the thing realistically. So we have created by legislation an entity called Environmental Protection Agency. And like most statutory organizations, the entity is there created to protect us, to protect Guyanese. That specific entity is there to ensure that where works are going on, whether it's construction, whether it's clearing, or in this case, oil, it is being done in an environmentally prudent manner that is not going to cause a catastrophe. The EPA is there to help us, to protect us. And that's important because we don't know what's happening on the oil rigs. If anybody says they know what's happening on the oil rigs, they're lying. We don't know what the safety standards are. We don't know what the technology is. We don't know. 5 years ago, we were growing sugarcane. Don't let's pretend that we know about oil. So we have to rely on the EPA, a statutory organization created by Parliament, to protect us because we don't know. We can't go and do a recount on the Exxon rig. We don't have the skills. And what happened is that two citizens who felt that the permit under which Exxon was operating required insurance coverage so that the insurance company, if an oil spill happened, would be obligated contractually to put in all the money that is needed to fix this oil spill, to correct it, to put us back into the pristine situation that we are now. They felt that that had not been done, and the EPA had not done its job to ensure Exxon had fulfilled its contractual and regulatory mandate to provide that insurance coverage. Now, I don't know about you, the viewer, but speaking for myself, I have never seen a contract for insurance between Exxon and anybody. And I suspect if I write Exxon, they're not going to send me the contract. And if there is a contract, I have never seen any premium paid by Exxon on the contract. I suspect if I ask Exxon for the premium to prove to me that they've paid the premium, they're not going to show it to me. But Exxon got to show EPA. EPA's responsibility is to ensure that there is adherence to the regulatory regime and that us, the citizens, are protected. And when these two citizens went to court to say EPA is not doing its job, it's not like you're suing your neighbor for trespass, so it's adversarial, it's you against your neighbor. As a statutory body designed to protect us, created to protect us, the EPA is not supposed to come to court hiding. It's supposed to come to court to say, here is what I've done. My job is not to hide and to be defendant and to play coy and say, you got to prove it. My job is to come and say to the court, here's the contract, here's what my discussion with Exxon was, here's what Exxon has said they're doing, and these are the steps I have taken. Please tell me if I've done the right thing or if I haven't done the right thing. That is what an honest statutory body with integrity should do when called to court to account. Because the fact is, they're not there to defend themselves, they're there to protect us. And the way that they protect us is to show all the cards on the table. Show everybody this is the steps we have taken, especially the court, because the court is now asking, and the court is the authority that is empowered to demand the information and to adjudicate whether the law has been complied with. EPA didn't do that. So EPA said, y'all got to prove your case. I'm not showing you anything. And therefore, I respectfully agree with what Justice Kissoon did when he said, you can't pretend to have a conscience if you are going to come and hide behind obscurity, show no transparency, refuse to give information, and say that these two citizens, people just like me, who never see the contract, who don't know, who cannot say whether there's an insurance contract, whether the premiums have been paid, what are the terms of the contract, how much insurance is being offered. You can't say to them, too bad for you, you don't have the information and I'm not giving it to you. That cannot be EPA's response. So the judge therefore insisted on disclosure, which is what EPA should have done in the first place. And I agree with him that the approach taken by EPA should have been full disclosure so that he could make an informed decision. I hope that it is a lesson for other public bodies. You see, the EPA is created by Parliament, and Parliament is owned by government. So who you think appoints the people in the EPA? Government. And if government says to the people it appointed in the EPA, you need to approve that permit, or you need to turn a blind eye to this wrongdoing, or you need to allow that regulatory slip, I rather suspect that those party loyalists will take instructions from the people who have hired them and have the power to fire them. That is exactly why Going back to Chronicle, when the government appoints that board can decide who they're hiring and firing, and therefore you know that the reporters that are hired are the reporters that are loyal to the board, which is loyal to the government. We need to have an environmental protection agency whose members are appointed by both the government side and the opposition side, and who has members on that agency appointed by both sides, so that there is full transparency and everybody can see what's going on. But more than that, the folk who are running the agencies, the EPA, the GEA, GPL, GUYANA, all of the agencies, must understand that they are there to protect and look after us. They must do their jobs, but when they are called to court, and the court says, show me your information, let us see if you are acting lawfully, it's not time to hide. That's time to say, I'm so glad you asked, here's what I'm doing, please tell me I'm doing the right thing, and if I'm not, tell me where I gotta change it. That's what professionalism is about, and that's what independence is about, and that's what we haven't seen.
I'm gonna now that you've explained that matter and the matter is done, I'm gonna bring up the next phase of what is currently occurring. And I know this is going to be largely in part based on opinion, but I'd like you to please give me what you think would have been or is the correct procedure, or what your take is on the matter when it comes to the fact that this decision was made by the judge to have Exxon full coverage for any disaster, oil spill, etc. That judgment was given and they had 30 days to comply. Within that 30 days, and I were talking about within the last week or so, we have now seen the government of Guyana, through the Ministry of Legal Affairs, take up the matter as an involved party, if I'm not mistaken, to now challenge that decision. So the government of Guyana themselves are appealing the decision of the judge to have Exxon cover any oil spill or be fully insured if there was an oil spill. So give me your take on the next phase of what has occurred.
I found that disappointing. You see, you have a situation where the only interested party is Exxon. Mm-hmm. EPA is not an interested party. EPA is supposed to be saying to the court, here's the information, please tell me I'm doing the right thing. The other interested parties are the two private citizens who took Exxon to court. If Exxon appeals, I understand. They're an interested party. They may be financially hard done by if they got to pay for more insurance coverage, or if they got to spend more money to buy the insurance, or whatever hoops they got to jump through to meet the regulatory scheme. They're an interested party. They may appeal. But if I'm in government and Exxon is operating under a license and the EPA is regulating them, and two private citizens have gone to say something's wrong, please fix it, and the court has done what the court is supposed to do to give a ruling, and there is an appeal procedure, mm-hmm. How on earth is the government interested in this process except to sit back and be content that the system is working and that the legal structure has worked and a judge has pronounced, and that the EPA has been brought to task and shown what it needs to do to accord with the laws, and if Exxon doesn't like it, they can appeal, and if the citizens feel something is wrong in the judgment, they can appeal. But how is the government an interested party? The government's only interest is in securing that the system works, and the
people are protected,
and the system has worked.
Right.
So I was surprised about that and disappointed, and it begs the question: what's their motive? What do they get out of this? Mm-hmm. I don't know the answer to that, but I was disappointed to see how quickly and how radically they responded, and without explaining why they felt that they had an interest. They had a horse in the race. I was interested to find out that. Well,
I'll give you again. This was in the press. It was not. I was not privy to the court proceedings. I didn't read transcripts. But what was reported was that the government had mentioned that there will be dire economic consequences if Exxon has to pay full coverage insurance. Full stop. They didn't mention what the dire economic issues were going to be. They didn't mention any of the details. Their whole response was just basically that there will be dire consequences.
So we're not sure if it's dire consequences for Exxon or for the government.
Or for the people of Guyana, because I feel like those are three different things now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know that when we used to grow sugar for a living, we weren't wealthy. I know that now we've got lots of free money coming in, and the government is using it to build roads and all kinds of things to make people think they're doing a good job. Maybe they're afraid that will dry up a bit. I don't know. I don't want to speculate on it. But to talk about dire economic consequences, I think it needs to condescend to particulars a little bit. We got to know what they're talking about, and that didn't answer the question.
Well, it's in court. It has already moved forward. So I think at this stage we're all waiting to see. I guess in a nutshell whether or not we'll be protected. But
in the meantime, let's hope there's not an oil spill, and let's hope that by the time that, if it ever happens, hopefully it won't be major, but there will be a structure for our protection. And I'm amazed that anybody would want to take steps to bring that into doubt, that happy end result into doubt, that we are protected.
Worrisome. Nonetheless, I do believe we are basically out of time now. I think there's quite a few scenarios we still have to discuss in detail. Hopefully, in the upcoming weeks, we have local government elections on its way in. We've seen some very interesting scenarios taking place there. We have the Press Association. I just double back. I was thinking back of what you were saying, where we don't have issues in Guyana right now where the press has been victimized, kidnapped or license pulled or etc. But I've been like yourself. I tried to look at all the various media houses and their input, and I read. I think it was just a private comment from one of the journalists in which they had expressed very interestingly worrying that same scenario as the worrying side, because as the Guyana Press Association, it is their job to accredit journalists. And they get their passes in which give them access to different media situations and ongoing events, etc. And I think what they're worried about is if it does go into government control, because those are the ones that are challenging it. If those people go into place, they are going to have various media houses and operatives licenses revoked and passes and accreditation.
Well, that will be a test of their professionalism, won't it?
Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see. But nonetheless, again, it's in the court's hands. And I know you, of all people, will be the first to say once it's in the courts.
We got to leave it alone.
We leave it and wait and see. Nonetheless, I think that is all our time this evening, ladies and gentlemen. So what I'd like to do is, again, apologize for our hiatus over the past couple of weeks. There was a disruption to our schedule. But what I can assure you is we are back on track. We have some very interesting upcoming weeks taking shape in Guyana, and we're going to be following some matters very closely, and I hope all of you here can join us every Friday night at 6:30 to 7:30 right here on Daybreak News or the Guyanese Critic page. You can also follow Mr. Timothy Jonas or myself under KIAN JABOUR. Those are our private pages. Please feel free and welcome to reach out to us. As you can tell, our number is also right on the screen. That is the apolitically incorrect WhatsApp number. Or local telephone number. Please reach out to us whenever you like. Even when we're not on program, what I just ask is you drop a WhatsApp, because I don't always have the phone with me. But nonetheless, I'll do my best to respond to every one of there. Any questions, anything you think you'd like to speak about or have us speak about here on the show. So on this wonderful Friday evening, once again, Mr. Jonas, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
All right, and we will be back here next Friday, 6:30 p.m. All right, for all of us here at Apolitically Incorrect Guyana and Daybreak News, thank you for joining us. Take care.